going to use this video to go over all of the questions on the review. It may be split into a couple videos just depending on how long it takes me to get through these, but that way you can pause this if you need to, you can rewind it, you can go back and look at specific problems if you are stuck on them, and then from there feel free to email me if you still have questions. I will also post the written solutions to this as if I normally would. It'll just be on Google Classroom. Okay? So for number 1, we are using quadratic formula. So if you do not remember, the quadratic formula is going to be x equals opposite of b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then remember, if it ever asks you to find the discriminant, you are just doing what's underneath the square root right there. So for number 1, we are going to start with that discriminant just because it makes it easier instead of plugging in a ton of numbers and trying to simplify. So we have our a value, which is 1, b is 4, and then c is negative 10. And we can start off right away doing this because our equation is equal to 0. So for your discriminant, you have 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. So this is going to give you 16 plus 40, which means your discriminant is 56. So looking at this, since our discriminant is a positive number, we should have 2 answers when we do the quadratic formula. So now plugging into the quadratic formula, we are going to have x equals the opposite of b. So here b is positive 4, we are going to have a negative 4 plus and minus the square root of 56, because that's what our discriminant is right here. And it is going to be all over 2 times 1, because a is 1 in this case. Now the square root of 56 breaks down, so that's something that you want to check on all of these. Off to the side somewhere, just go ahead and break down square root of 56, and you want to look at that list of perfect squares and see which is the biggest one that goes into 56. I believe that's 16, no, 4 is going to be our biggest one. So we have 4 and 14, which means this is going to be just a 2 square root 14. And again, you can just Google a list of perfect squares, or you can write them out. If you don't have it in front of you, you could also use that multiplication chart that we've had before. So now when you are simplifying this, you are going to have negative 4 plus and minus 2 square root 14 all over 2. For this, you can leave your answer like that. I'm perfectly okay with it. But if you notice that negative 4, 2, and 2 all reduce, this would take it a step further. So you could completely simplify this and say that your answer is negative 2 plus and minus 1 square root 14 over 1. But I am perfectly okay if you leave your answer like this. Okay? And notice how we did not simplify underneath the square root. That 14 is going to stay 14. So that is how you would solve for number 1. Number 2, we are going back to our perfect squares again. So this is where you wanted to look at that chart that we had in class where we said that 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, and so on. And you wanted to find the biggest one that goes into 432. The biggest perfect square in 432 is going to be 144. So if you divide that, you're going to end up with the square root of 144 and the square root of 3. 144 breaks down to be just a 12, not under square root, and you have the square root of 3 left over. So that is your answer. All right, moving on to number 3. This one says to use that equation to answer the following questions. Now, it only wants you to find the discriminant. There were several of you on the homework where it asked you to find the discriminant and you were solving the entire thing. That's too much work. You wouldn't get any points because you're not showing me that you know what the discriminant is or what it means. So you always want to check to make sure that your equation is set equal to 0. This one is. So now when we're finding the discriminant, all we are doing is b squared minus 4 times a times c. So we have a, b, and c. We are just going to plug them in. So we have negative 5 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times 1. All right, I'm going to move it up here. So it's going to turn into 25 minus 4 times negative 3. So then we are going to have 25 plus 12, because this is a negative times a negative, and this is going to give us 37. So if it asks you for the answer to the discriminant, that would be it. Now, in the video that I posted, there were 3 different cases for the discriminant, if it was positive, negative, or 0. So when it says to state the number of solutions, that's what you're referring to. Since 37 is positive, that means we are going to have 2 solutions if we were to do quadratic formula. All right, now going back up to number 1, 2 solutions just means that you have 2 different things. And in number 1, that comes from that plus and minus, because you would have negative 4 plus 2 root 14 and then negative 4 minus 2 root 14. You could also have 2 solutions that would just be like negative 5 and positive 1. So there's a couple different cases. You're going to see some examples on here. But just so you know that if it says to state the number of solutions, this is what it means. If your answer was negative, you would have no solutions. And if your discriminant was 0, you would have 1 solution. Okay? All right, moving on to number 4. So we haven't seen this stuff in a long time. Again, this is where you guys want to look at your perfect square chart and see what is the biggest perfect square that goes into these numbers. So we are going to start with the 80. Square root of 80 can break down to be the square root of 16 and the square root of 5. And then the square root of 16 is just a regular 4, and the square root of 5 stays underneath. For the x to the third, this is where we wanted it in pairs. So we would split it up, and we had an x squared and an x, because if you add these together, you would get back to that x to the third. The square root of x squared just becomes an x, and the square root of x stays underneath. Now we have square root of y. We can't do anything with that, so we just bring it down. And then we have a z to the fourth, and remember, for your even exponents, we just cut those in half. So z to the fourth becomes z squared, and it's no longer under a square root. So then for your answer, you want everything that's not under a square root to be written out in front. So we have 4x z squared. And then we want everything under a square root to be written under the square root. So we have 5xy. And this would be your answer. So for B, we're going to start with the square root of 28. Oops. And this is going to be a 4 and a 7, and the square root of 4 is 2. Then we have the a squared. Again, this exponent is even, so we are just going to divide, cut it in half, and we get just an a, not under a square root anymore. And then for b to the 7th, since it's odd, we need to split it up. So you always do 1 less, so b to the 6th, because now it's even, and then just a b. And then this b to the 6th is going to be cut in half, and you get a b to the 3rd, and the square root of b stays underneath. And just like before, what's on the outside is going to be brought to the outside. So you're going to have 2a b to the 3rd, and then what's underneath is going to be left underneath the square root. So you have square root of 7b. All right, and then the last one like this, we have 75. So remember when we were doing these and I told you if you ever have anything like a 25, a 50, or a 75, think of quarters. So this is going to be split up to be 25 and 3, and then the square root of 25 is 5, and that root 3 just gets brought down. Then you have the square root of m to the 5th, and this is odd. So now you're going to have, oops, sorry guys, working with new things. So now you're going to have the square root of m to the 4th, because we always want one that's one less, and then the one that's left over. This m to the 4th is going to just become an m squared, not in a square root anymore, and the square root of m gets brought down. And then you have the p squared. Since this is even, we just cut it in half, and we're left with a p. So now, just like the other two, the 5, the m squared, and the p are going to be out in front. And then this 3 and this m are going to stay underneath, and this would be your answer. All right, so I am going to start a new video for, oh, I didn't see D. We can do this one as well. And then I'll start a new video for the other ones. So for this, start with the 40. 40 can break down to be the square root of 4 and the square root of 10. The square root of 4 is 2, and then you have that 10 left over. And then for x to the 4th, this is even, so we don't have to break it down. We just cut it in half, and we get x squared. And then for y to the 6th, again, this is even, an even exponent, so we just cut it in half, and we get y to the 3rd. So then we have 2x squared y to the 3rd. And then this square root of 10 is all by itself underneath the square root, and that would be our answer. All right, so now I'm going to start a new video for the next ones, just because I don't want them to be too long, and that way you can go back if you need to.